Hello, everyone, and I would like welcome to another episode of The Lucky Show. I'm your host, Lucky Explosion, and I'm here today to talk about something that's very important that I feel like is a bit different than what I normally talk about. You see, for the past two episodes, I have been talking about personal preferences or things that have been happening in my life that I wanted to go ahead and discuss about. For today's episode, though, we're going to be extending my boundary a bit, just like I said in my Jimmy episode, by talking about something that's not exactly personal to me, but something that I feel like is important to note, because nowadays, in this day and age, the question of irrelevancy is something very big and very concerning with some kinds of things. Irrelevancy or irrelevant, when something becomes irrelevant, can really come down to our current time, how people see something like that, and basically how how it used to be. So take for example YouTube channels. There have been multitudes of YouTube channels that have risen to high amounts of fame and fortune, but that nowadays just aren't really in the topic anymore of being relevant because the things that they have done or the content that they've created and produced just never could really figure out a way to stay relevant. Like, Let's Plays have always been around for a long time on YouTube, ever since people started to do them. But nowadays, it's kind of hard to really make a Let's Play kind of thing because nobody really seems to watch those kinds of episodes or things anymore. Unless you're looking for one of those nostalgic kind of feelings, you know? But when it really comes down to is that when it comes to talking about relevancy, there is a whole lot of things that you need to know before you could really say that something is irrelevant. And that's what I aim to talk about today when I'm talking about today's certain type of relevant topic, or soon to be irrelevant topic that I believe, is Death Battle. Now, we have all once heard about Death Battle. I mean, you guys probably have even watched Death Battle. I myself am a prominent watcher of Death Battle. I have watched Death Battle for a very long time. But nowadays, Death Battle seems to have become something that not a lot of people really want to talk about, or really nobody really seems to discuss. Because back in the day, Death Battle used to be something very big. It was a prominent figure in YouTube. Like, every day I could see the algorithm sending me more and more Death Battle videos because I enjoyed watching them. Nowadays, however, Death Battle is just a mere figment of imagination and nostalgic. Even nowadays, their current videos don't even seem to rack up as many views as their previous ones could. And right as they're in their current 7th season, it's becoming apparent that eventually Death Battle is just not going to be relevant to this current time and age. Now, we've already heard, and a lot of people have already known about how Death Battle plans to eventually end, with the coming end being a battle to the death between the two hosts, Wiz and Boomstick. And I know very well for a fact that the people behind Death Battle want to keep that last epic battle for until eventually they come up with more and more battles. But the problem is that nowadays people aren't exactly 100% in line with wanting to figure out the question of who could win in a battle anymore. We're more focused on the different kinds of topics because while yes, there are some people that really want to answer those questions, nowadays the question of who can win in a fight has become practically irrelevant and very much already answered. There's not really a whole lot of matchups that I could really think of that require definitive answers. Well, except for a couple, but even then, once Death Battle eventually runs out of ideas for the battles, they're gonna have to eventually end the show. And honestly speaking, right now, at this current age, Death Battle just seems like it's not exactly, like it's trying to remain relevant. But in the way that it is right now, Death Battle is just not exactly capable of keeping itself alive in its current state. For one thing, a lot of their battles recently still are haven't really gotten as much views as I previously stated. And because of that, it's really become apparent that not a lot of people are that interested in battles to the death anymore, or something along the lines of that. Because even nowadays, Death Battle is the only channel that tries to keep itself afloat with this kind of content. All the other channels that attempted to try and do the same thing that Death Battle did, they've all gone. All of them are gone. I haven't heard a thing about any of the other channels, such as like Animation Showdown or anything along the lines of that. Basically put, Death Battle is the prominent bringer of death battle shows or fights to the death. And that may be debatable, or that might actually not even be true. And while it might not actually be true, it's still apparent that Death Battle has been a prominent figure for when it came to giving us the results and answers for these questions that came apparent and becoming brought up. So, for today's episode, I wanted to go ahead and break down this topic of Death Battle relevancy into three main portions. The first portion talking about the history behind Death Battle and how it rose to its fame, to the second portion, which we will talk about the beginning, or what I believe to be the beginning start of its decline, to the current state that Death Battle is in right now, and determining if whether or not Death Battle will either have a fall or if it will just fade out into irrelevancy, while still trying to maintain a little bit of a status on YouTube. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this with these three main sections, with the first one being So, let's start off with something small, which is the beginning first section, the rise and the beginnings of Death Battle. Now, I'm not going to go very high depth into the history of Death Battle because, to be honest, I just did not have enough time to really research this thoroughly because of high school and all that, so I had to go based off of the certain amounts of information that I could get just in time for the video. So, Death Battle was created by Ben Singer with assistance from Chris Stismas as executive producer, and was run with also collaboration of Revision 3. I'm not entirely sure what Revision 3 was, but I did remember seeing it on almost every single Death Battle episode many years ago. So it was perhaps some sort of collaboration kind of thing, but either way, they were always connected to Death Battle in some way. Furthermore, as first, Death Battle was starting off as a smaller type of channel. It started off with its own type of creation in 2006 with the Screw Attack channel, after it was eventually partnered up with Screw Attack, which would evidently bring about the change in Death Battle's history. Of course, Death Battle had its first battle, which was Samus Aran versus Boba Fett. As of nowadays, that battle sits at around 6.7 million views, as I recall seeing it last time, and at this current day and age, it's actually still surprising that it has that many views, because honestly, Death Battle nowadays, they don't really get that many views as they did back then, because back then Death Battle was racking up the views with every new episode. As soon as their second episode came out, 8 million views. Their third episode came out, 7 million, 12 million. Up most, their highest, most popular video has over 45 million views, with their second highest popularity video coming in with only 40 million. This channel was rising very hard, at a rapid rate, with every single battle always racking up up to 1 million views, which honestly was surprising, considering the fact that back then it was quite weird to really see all of this. Now, of course, at some point, when Screw Attack eventually brought Death Battle along with them for the ride, they stopped uploading bits and pieces of Death Battle every so often, with more or less just, playthrough kind of things for a majority of the time. Of course, while these didn't rack up that many views, up to only 15,000 at most, it was still apparent that as soon as Death Battle came back, bam, 8.1 million views. Death Battle was racking up the views, and honestly, it was just very impressive. With every battle that came out, it was just a new amount of success that was coming in for Death Battle. With all the views that was coming in, Death Battle would prominently also receive dozens of subscribers, evidently making them a very popular force on YouTube. And it would continue like this for many years, continuing thereon as for many more to come. 25 million views for their Batman vs. Spider-Man video. It continued on like this for practically a long time, until eventually we reach their first controversy and the beginning parts of where we begin to end the first section. Goku vs Superman. Their most popular death battle ever, with astonishing 45 million views, which I said is their most popular video to this day. That nowadays people like to say is their most controversial battle that Death Battle will ever have in existence. Because even as I look through the comments of this video, there was a lot of salt in the comment section for this video that came out. And even nowadays, people still have arguments in this comment section. Because, like, honestly, it was that much. People were literally that like salty about this death battle that even nowadays they're still putting in the comment section debates and all of that. And honestly, this was their first major controversy with their first death battle. However, after that, they reached their 25 episode mark, which would prompt a sudden new change in how they did Death Battle. Of course, animation would get better with every new battle they created, with even the creation of a spin-off series known as 1 Minute Melee, which was essentially it was a spin-off of Death Battle, in that two contestants would face off in an entire 1 minute match until as soon as the timer ran out, one of them would either win or it would end in a double KO. The thing that separated this from Death Battle was the simple fact that in 1 Minute Melee, no research was done. So essentially, a victor was probably declared based off of limited knowledge or based off a sort of attempted voting or some like a little bit of a choosing system. Either way, I don't know, because to this day, nobody really knows how the victors of 1 Minute Melee have really been found. And these proved to be popular as well, some garnishing almost as much, like approximately up to 2 million views. Granted, not as much as Death Battle per se, but still big enough to be considered a very viable amazingness in how it was created. Of course, their second controversy would also pop up in the form of Gara versus Toph, which honestly, if you recall, it's let's just say that the salt in this one, it was very big, and honestly, it was honestly a bit interesting to say the least. But even then, as Death Battle continued to grow and grow, it was very apparent that Death Battle had very much achieved quite a big amount of success. Continuing on, there wasn't really much issues with controversies or none of that with the majority of their battles for the majority of the time. Now, sure, there were a couple of instances where some death battles were a little bit salted on, but either way, it was still prominently a very viable amount. And before I forget, this is after their battle between Dante versus Bayonetta. A new spin-off was also created called DBX, a show that would be run by Mr. Boomstick himself, which would pit two characters against each other once again, without the time limit, unlike 1 Minute Melee, and essentially make them fight to the death with once again, no research. And those, of course, would begin to also rack up a dozen amounts of views as well, with up to 1 million views, just like with the 1 Minute Melees. And honestly, this was quite impressive, to be honest. It was really well done. Now, of course, there were still a couple of other controversies as well, such as Scout versus Tracer, but we don't really get into that one as well, mainly because I don't really want to deal with that drama anymore. And then, of course, Doomsday versus Hulk. Let's just say that that was also a quite a bit of a salty battle as well, in my opinion at least. But as we continue on, it becomes very apparent that Death Battle was still a prominent, gigantic figure. They still garnished over very positive amounts of views in every single video that they created. Their Death Battle still continued to rack up to a total of 10 million views, and whilst they diminished in their view count a bit, they were still very successful in how they were. With every battle that continued on, it was becoming apparent that Death Battle had its own scheme to really rack up the views, whether it be a battle to the death or a fight to the finish in just 1 minute. It was quite very positive that they had the scheme completely down. Now, when I say scheme, I don't mean scheme as in a bad way. I mean scheme as that they knew what they were doing when it came to how exactly they were creating this type of stuff. And honestly, that's really impressive. But of course, as we continue on, we get to the standing point where there is a sudden split in our little section, because we have reached approximately the end of where the entirety of the history of Death Battle really ends, from me at least. I know it wasn't that in depth, but I wanted to get some of the bits and pieces of it out. And we now enter the area where we reach Death Battle's 100th episode. And if you recall, for the 100th episode, they decided to do a little bit of a revisiting and recreation of one of their very old battles. Sort of rematch, if you could. And let me just say that personally, I believe that once this battle came out, it hit hard, and I believe it started the small decline of Death Battle itself. So, how exactly do I get started with this? Oh, okay, yeah, I know. People were not happy when it came to the Mario vs. Sonic 100th Death Battle episode, which, to be honest, was supposed to be the most hyped up Death Battle episode ever. For a bit of context, a few weeks ago, before they ever uploaded any real previews of the battle, they made a video where the two hosts, Wiz and Boomstick, were messing around as usual, but for the first time in history, we were capable of seeing who they were. We get to see Boomstick for the redneck that he was, and Wiz for the scientist who apparently has a robot arm guy, so that we could actually see who they are. And honestly, this was actually quite impressive, because that meant that because of this, we were going to be able to see them for the 100th episode actually move around and, do some bits of interactions, which honestly I believe was going to be done in a good way. Now, that's not to say that this kind of change was perfect in its execution, because some people still think that despite having this sort of surprise change in animation and all that, it wasn't really a good idea for them to just bring this out and just actually give Wiz and Boomstick visual representation. Because most people think that Wiz and Boomstick fit more as voices rather than actual people that you can see. But of course, it was their own decision to do this, and so they did it. To some mixed results, as I was just saying. And it was revealed that for the 100th episode, they were going to reveal themselves and actually host the show with us being able to see them. And honestly, that sounded nice. I was actually excited for this. I was willing to actually see what this was going to be like. And let me just say, I was impressed with the animation improvements for the episode, how Wiz and Boomstick looked, how they acted. It was alright for me. However, as I look back and as I remember how people acted when this episode came out, the fans weren't happy. Looking through the comments, I saw a majority of people think that Death Battle was paid, or possibly even forced to change the results for Mario to win. Because a majority of people noted some inconsistencies with the episode itself, with some surprise events coming out, with a majority of changes as well. It was becoming apparent that some people think that this battle was possibly even rigged. Of course, I have no comment to say on what I think about the Mario vs. Sonic Death Battle. At this point, I have moved on from that, because honestly, I don't really care that much for the result anymore. But when it comes to how people felt with this episode, people were really not happy with this. And it became quite apparent because soon enough, after this 100th episode came to be, it became apparent that Death Battle was starting to fall into a bit of a decline in viewership. Because as I continued to look through Death Battle, I just completely started to know that their view count just wasn't as good as it would have been. Because as time progressed, it was becoming clear that the Death Battle was starting to lose its main target audience because people just started to not really care that much for battles to the death. I mean, nowadays, a majority of their videos, even after their 100th episode was published, their view count still continued to tank a bit because despite the big amounts of efforts to try and provide some change to how the show was run, it didn't exactly bring about a high amount of increase in viewership. I mean, not to mention the other controversies that also came about with the other recent Death Battles as well, just continued to plummet the view count of Death Battle to an extent, effectively lowering their view count so hard that they only reached about 3 million to about only 4 million views for a majority of their more recent Death Battles as their season continued. Even to the point where one of their Death Battles continuously only received 2.4 million views, like a massive tank in viewership compared to their more earlier seasons and episodes. And honestly, that was actually a bit sad because Death Battle had showcased that it had the potential to keep itself going, but it completely failed at trying to do that. Honestly, the controversies that completely contributed to the declining viewership just continuously destroyed Death Battle's popularity. Even despite the constant changes to the show, with the attempts to try and make Wiz and Boomstick be more wackier with their interactions, it was still apparent that a majority of people were just not interested in the show anymore. Nobody was really that interested in watching characters fight to the death because at this point, the question was starting to become irrelevant to the situation at hand. Not to mention that a majority of people were starting to become more focused on other things like newer shows, newer amounts of people, like new amounts of games and all of that. Just made it apparent that nowadays it just wasn't interesting to really figure out who could win in a fight. I mean, nobody was really getting that interested anymore, and Death Battle was starting to see this happen. And because of that, it was becoming apparent that they really didn't have any more chances to try and fix this. Like, they have tried to fix it multiple times throughout the majority of their episodes, but even despite their chances or their attempts to try and revive their seasons, it's just never truly worked. Their view count just never really got back to where it was before. And honestly, that's just where it starts to go down for their decline. Irrelevancy, controversy, and what I believe to be the closer amounts of sudden amounts of changes and declines, the character increase and the attempt to try and turn Death Battle into a story kind of thing. And finally, we reach Section 3. Now, honestly, Section 3 is truly the beginnings of how Death Battle was starting to just lose relevancy completely. Because as the years progressed, Death Battle was truly just not capable of keeping itself above the water anymore. Their attempts to try and turn the show into a more sophisticated storyline show, including with their new increased characters such as Dummy and a new host for DBX, clearly showcased their attempts to try and keep Death Battle to become relevant. I mean, heck, at some point they even changed their Screw Attack channel to become just the Death Battle channel, nothing else. I mean, heck, even at some point, as they attempted to try and make sure that their show could still be relevant, it just wasn't possible. Like, it was just not possible whatsoever. Anytime they tried to fix it or just make something interesting, it just did not work. Now, and I don't mean that to, and I don't say that to be mean or throw shade on the people who created Death Battle, because I sincerely still think that they are trying nowadays, but whatever it is that they are trying to do, it's just not working in this current day and age. Battles to the death are just not that, exciting or interesting or that, 100% popular anymore. Sure, the animation of their show may have gotten a bit better, but at the same time, people also argue that their show animation has gotten worse. To the point that some people even think that their research has started to throw themselves off. I mean, if you were to even look at their at their very current episode of their 7th season, it currently stands to only have half of a million views. Only 589 to be exact. Take that into account with their Batman vs. Batman vs. Iron Man battle, which only has 1.7 million views, and you'll start to see where I'm coming from, because at this point, it's just not relevant anymore. There is just no more relevancy when it comes to Death Battle. And honestly, that brings a bit of sadness to me, because there are still some people that are 100% still liking the show. There are still fans that love Death Battle and still want to see it continue. But I'm afraid to say this, but if this irrelevancy can still continue to this day, then Death Battle is going to have to hang up its curtains and announce their final episode of Battle, which, if you recall, is supposed to be a battle to the death between Wiz and Boomstick. And not to mention with the bigger issue of ideas for battles to essentially just becoming harder to figure out, it's very, I mean at this point they've had to reuse some of their old combatants and just mix up the matchups a bit to try and ignite some sort of debate. And nowadays, that's just seen as redundant, because Batman has already been in a majority of Death Battles, and so to see him in a new battle every single couple of months or so just makes it seem like they're doing it to be, it just feels redundant to me. Like, okay, it's Batman, you've already talked about him multiple times, like, what's different? Like, sure, Batman may have new gear or something like that, but either way, it's still Batman. Like, I've already heard your explanation of his backstory and all of that, so it just feels redundant. So, I mean, like, not to be mean, but when it really comes to finalizing all of this, it's just apparent that Death Battle has had a massive amount of a decline in their viewership and really in their main amount of, attempts to try and keep the show relevant. Now, do I really think that Death Battle could possibly have a fall, like, at some point? Possibly yes, because right now, with this current viewership, it's becoming quite apparent that Death Battle cannot really stand on these numbers alone. Sure, they might still be good numbers, but they're not the numbers that they used to reach like many years ago, when they used to be a very high prominent power force of YouTube, which nowadays they're not really even mentioned. I don't even get much of recommendations from them anymore. And honestly, that just brings a little bit of sadness so far. So, to really go ahead and finalize with the third section and bringing it to a conclusion, Death Battle has tried their hardest to keep themselves relevant with whatever they could, even at times sacrificing their 1-minute melee show, which has not seen another episode in years now, and attempting to try and make DBX a sort of a similar spin-off to Death Battle, changing that rules completely from it being a battle to the death with no rules or practically any real kind of sure way of figuring out who the winner can be, to making it just a voting system, just allowing for people to vote for who they want to win, effectively almost killing any real sort of attempts to try and make it feel a bit random. Because, sure, it's okay to let people vote for who they want to win, but at the same time, I just feel like it defeats the purpose of it being DBX. Like, there's no rules, no research, no nothing. Like, it just makes it feel like they're trying to spice it up to some degree, but with not really any big chances of making it relevant again. So, to finalize this up and to finish off with the conclusion, Death Battle has had quite a massive rise. It was a massive prominent powerhouse that once it was brought along for the ride with Screw Attack and eventually ended its partnership with Revision, proved to be a very valuable source of income for Screw Attack and a massive powerhouse for YouTube. But as soon as controversies and after their 100th episode soon came about, which personally I believe is the beginning of their decline, viewership continuously continued to decline. Their videos were beginning to feel a bit redundant with the massive amounts of attempts to try and make it relevant, to where it stands today, where now they can barely even reach over 5 million views with some of their videos. Honestly, I personally don't believe there can really be any kind of revival of Death Battle, because the damage is already done. There's not really any chances I can see of Death Battle being revived. Of course, anything could be possible with a miracle, but miracles aren't exactly prominent or that really, big of happening. So while I don't want any of this to sound like I'm hating Death Battle or saying that it's saying anything like this to make it sound mean or be rude, I'm only saying this because because this just feels like the truth. Like, there's no way going around this or anything like that. It's going on a decline. Death Battle is going on a decline, and honestly, the way I see it, Death Battle is probably going to hit its massive amount of a fall sooner or later. When that will be, I probably don't know. But once the final battle does come out, we'll soon see for ourselves, and I do hope that when it does come out, we'll have a fantastic ending to one of the most prominent, most amazing, and honestly, one of the used to be the most popular shows on YouTube ever to be created. And if any of the producers of Death Battle ever see this video and get this far, I just want you guys to know that you guys are still doing your best, and honestly, I really do hope that you guys continue doing what you're doing, even though, despite not being able to capture much of people's interest. You still have a fan base of people who are willing to still watch your videos because they enjoy what you do. So as long as they are still willing to watch you, and as long as you're capable of doing what you're doing with the greatest amount of your best, then honestly, it doesn't matter if Death Battle is on its fall, because it will still hold its place, hold a title of the nostalgicness of YouTube history, and honestly, that'll be an award that'll be well-deserved for you, Screw Attack, and for you, Death Battle. So to really finalize this episode, I just want to go ahead and say that this video took way longer than it should have, but at the same time, I do have school and all of that, so it's quite a bit of a conundrum for me right now. But of course, if you really did enjoy today's episode, please like and subscribe. It really does go ahead and help me out. I do have some other plans for another video, hopefully along the line, but I will say this. I do have plans of taking a potential hiatus, because I'm currently in one of those moments where I might need to focus more on my schoolwork than the YouTube channel, so it might be a while before I upload anything. Just so you know, I probably upload a couple of tiny shorts or anything like that, but as for major video creations, those are probably going to be put on hold until I get a decent amount of time to start working on those stuff again. But once again, just to be noted, I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I really enjoy you guys taking the time to watch out of your day to watch this. So, this has been Lucky Explosion, and I really do hope you all have a very lucky day. Ciao. So beginning with section 1, let's talk about the beginnings and rise of Death Battle.